Welcome. You all are much better than the students at getting quiet. Thank you. Welcome to Harpeth Hall. My name is Jess Hill, and it is my pleasure to serve as the head of school here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to be here. Thank you for persevering in the parking lot. I hope you didn't have to walk too far, but we really appreciate you circling around until you found a spot. It was March of 2021 that I had I was fortunate enough to introduce Tallu, Schuyler, Quinn to our students for the first time on this stage. And I told all 700 of them after she spoke that when I grew up, I wanted to be just like Tallu. And I know that all of you, or most of us at least, feel the same way. We are truly honored to partner with Parnassus Books, the Nashville Food Project, and the family of Tallu in hosting this event, the launching of her beautiful book, What We Wish Were True. In addition, we would like to give special thanks to Cindy Murray, Jess Foggy, Becky Nesbitt from Penguin Random House, and to Margaret Riley King, also a Harpeth Hall alumna, who was Tallu's book agent. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to turn the program over to someone who needs no introduction, our award-winning author, Ann Patchett.
Hello, thank you so much, Jess, and thank you, Harpeth Hall. We are all thrilled to be here. And what we're doing here today is our speakers are going to read pieces from Tallu's book. And we have Bonnie Smith Whitehouse, and we have Alice Randall, and we have Margaret Rankle, and we have Joe Croker. And they're going to all read a part of the book, and since they didn't have to write anything, I thought it would be best if I didn't write anything either. And the way that I handled that is, I imagine a lot of you read Margaret Rankle's remarkable piece about Tallu in the New York Times. So, in the spirit of reading other people's work, I'm going to read just a little bit of that as an introduction. I did not know, and I asked Margaret's permission. I just want you to know. This is not just like straight up plagiarism. She's a friend. And also, I should say that the whole reason that I'm here is because of Margaret. Because when Margaret got the galley of this book, she called me and she said, I need you to blurb this book. And I said, I don't blurb nonfiction. It's like a rule. And she said, I need you to break the rule. And I said, okay. It was such a gift. So thank you, Margaret, for telling me to do the right thing. So this is from Margaret's column. I did not know Miss Quinn personally, but even from a distance, I know that her life was a bright testament to the power of serving others. I know, too, that she could write like an angel, with poetry and humor and a bone-deep understanding of the way love and grief walk hand in hand through the world together, twined. As these tumors hold court in my mind and mix me up in these sad and terrible ways, she writes, I find shelter in new thanks and new praise and in another day, and even in how healing these salty tears taste pouring into my open mouth as I wail my thanks for this unexpected, unbelievable, boundless shelter of love. There are reasons to worry that a book which confronts the essential inevitability of death, especially the untimely death of a human being in love with the world, someone who never seemed to waste a minute of her one remarkable life and is heartbroken to leave it behind, will be a book that many readers will fear to face. But the human world has always been just this tragic, just this unbearable. And the literary world has always given us reasons to understand the gifts such books can offer, not in spite of the tragedies we witness and live through, but because of them if we don't turn away. What We Wish Were True like so many end-of-life memoirs that came before it and so many others still to come, is for readers a kind of literary near-miss experience. Its beauty reminds us to linger in the grace. Its wisdom teaches us to treasure the ordinary pleasures we ought to have been treasuring all along. I think about everything I will miss and what I won't be alive to witness or experience or endure or bounce back from, writes Ms. Quinn. No singing show tunes in the minivan, no burnt toast with butter in the mornings, no snuggling up to watch cooking shows, no walks together circling the neighborhood we love so much. Whether it comes before or after we turn the last page of a book, we know the ending of every human story. It cannot be changed. The finality of that truth is breathtaking. But what we wish were true is not a book about dying. It's a book about the life of an extraordinary person. It is a book about love and gratitude and making every day an opportunity to love, a chance to decide again and again to keep on loving for as long as we draw breath, and through the miracle of books, beyond it too. Thank you, Margaret. And ladies and gentlemen, I give you Bonnie Smith Whitehouse, author of many books, included Lighthearted, and a great friend of Tallu's. Thank you.
Well, I wrote a brief reflection, and I may have already messed up, but I'm going to go ahead and give it because I think Tallu would want me to. Would you breathe with me? Since the people of Earth started coming together to tell stories, they have done something called invoking the muse, calling on a creative, divine, radiant spirit to accompany them as they try to tell the tale. I hope you don't mind if I directly address our muse, our writer, my old soul sister, Tallu Schuyler Quinn, as we begin to honor her in this magnificent book she has left us. Oh, astonishing Tallu, my friend who was always cooking, knitting, planting, harvesting, sharing, giving, writing. These days, I open my pantry and I find a jar of applesauce you made in your kitchen. I open a drawer in my living room, looking for something else, and there's that beeswax candle you rolled with your own 2 hands. Atop my desk, I find the playlist of songs we collaborated on that we planned to play and sing at my birthday hootenanny in 2020, the one that never happened because we had to go into COVID lockdown. How I love to touch anything you have made. Oh, luminous Tallu, you once told me you didn't think our friendship would change all that much after you died. And I've been hanging on to that promise for dear life. I know I'm not alone. During your last months on Earth, you told us you were seeing faces in the tree branches. So I find myself looking up these days at the redbuds and the dogwoods budding out for your face. A couple of Saturdays ago, I laid down on the squishy earth right by your grave at Larkspur, and I swear you were saying, "Hey, bee," to me through the bright greenness of a little shoot growing right out of your grave. Oh, generous Tallu, you threw everything you had into creating recipes, business plans, and sanctuaries to nourish others. Can you see how we have tried to find ways to make your spirit feel at home in this space tonight? I'm wearing this shibori scarf you made because I'm craving being close to anything you crafted with your hands, like you crave those Castelvetrano olives. Emily and Vicky made that bread. Margot got some of Kirk's pottery. Lula even has a stamp with your signature on it, so she can sign your books for you. As you know, your wish that we could all leave your funeral with a loaf of bread came true. I thought I might save it and share it with the boys that night, but I left the church hungry to be fed by your spirit, so I ate it greedily in my car on the way home from the church to your house. There are still crumbs in my handbag, and I swear I will never clean them out. I will feed on them for the rest of my life. Oh, vulnerable Tallu, like you, your writing is so real. For years, you told me you wanted to write a book, and I had no doubt you would. I always knew a book with your name on the spine would sit on that giant bookshelf you and Robbie shared. None of us imagined the book would be in part about facing death at 42. But here we are, and you did it. You have never been afraid to brave the hard conversations. And when you suddenly faced death, you brought all your courage to the pages of this book. And how the world needs your courageous example. May this book be like a yeasty bread starter, so that the vulnerability you share within its pages will in turn make others more vulnerable, more audacious, more gutsy, more wild, more daring, more sometimes inappropriate, but in the best of ways, more willing to face the inevitability of our own deaths, more like you. OT, you labored so hard over this book. You crafted each sentence with such focus, such mastery, such virtuosity. You gave us your legacy, your side-splittingly hilarious stories. You gave us your grief, and you let us get close and touch it. Somehow you summoned your boundless love for Thomas and Lula and Robbie and your mom and dad and Roy and Luke and all the Quinns and the Circle and the Food Project and Mary Oliver and the Indigo Girls and Comfrey's Healing Roots and this whole wide, gorgeous, glorious earth and every hungry person on it. And you put your boundless love down on this page. And then you did a really brave thing, one of the hardest things a writer would ever have to do. When you couldn't even read the words you had composed back to yourself, you let them go. You flung them out like seeds. Oh, Tallu, you beautiful gardener with the iconic blonde hair atop your head. And so in showing us how to write, you were showing us how to live. Oh, hardworking Tallu, you total badass. This book is the proof that you are not finished with us yet. You so wanted to live in your body shell long enough to make it to this book launch, and that didn't happen. So may your glorious spirit join us at the table. Come closer, T. Put your elbows on the table. Lean in with us tonight. Imagine there's some panzanella salad and a mason jar of kombucha and some unexpected cheddar from Trader Joe's and radishes with melted butter and some Twizzlers. There's an old but colorful tablecloth and some candles, and we're eating off gorgeous pottery made by Brooke and Arwood. Tallu, be with us while we honor you and read your words from this magnificent book. For yes, you wrote a book, but you also lit a flame. This book is a torch from you to us. I raise it high above my head, and I welcome you to your party. May your book light an everlasting, holy fire inside everyone who reads it. How I love you, all the love, my old soul sister. So I want to read a bit from Becoming Bread. I think it shows how Tallu prepared us for her funeral, and it serves as a sequel to the bread feast that we had on that day. And Becoming Bread is also the epigraph of her book. It's from a book titled by Gunilla Norris. We become who we are together, each needing the other. Alone is a myth. And then she also opens with an epigraph by Martin Luther. We are all mere beggars, telling other beggars where we found bread. It seems like the minute I got sick, all these photographs of me holding loaves of bread showed up on the internet, like dozens of them. I actually love this and think about bread as a symbol threading through my adult life. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of being part of a 12-person spiritual formation group at my church. At the conclusion of our year together, we went on a retreat, and there was a session called Give God Words, during which our facilitators offered each participant a small frame with a single personalized God word inside. The God word I was given was bread, in Harry Potter font. And the members of our group commented that I offered bread in so many forms to so many, and that this bread was both actual and spiritual food. My framed God word, generously gifted to me, sits on our bathroom shelf, where it offers me a little lift and nourishment each morning. Give me this day my daily bread. The loaves of bread in the photographs of me are not props. I have been learning to bake bread for the last 30 years, and I most earnestly, albeit clumsily, devoted myself to it when my friend Kate gave me a Martha Rose Schulman bread book for my 16th birthday. I can remember our attempts at bagels and boiling them in a stock pot before baking, as well as practicing an herbed country loaf I still love to bake to this day. A month or so before COVID-19 pandemic hit, I taught a bread making class at my friend Katie and Dave's house. In preparation, I wanted to have a large amount of bread dough ready to shape and bake off, along with plenty of ingredients to make a fresh batch of dough for the participants to take home with them. I had an enormous bin of all-purpose flour in our minivan, and I can't remember how it happened, but flour ended up all over the dark interior of my car. It was an unbelievable amount of white powder in every crevice and on every surface. And some water spilled, at which point the inside of our minivan started to smell like dough and fermentation. It was a totally overwhelming amount of flour, and I wish another person had been with me to hear the line of questioning I got at the auto wash when I went to have it detailed. Ma'am, what is the nature of this white powdery substance? Years ago, in a Jewish Shabbos service I attended, there was a lacquered loaf of challah on a table with a beautiful embroidered cloth on top. Before we shared the bread, Rabbi Rami Shapiro referred to the cloth covering the loaf as he removed it and prayed over it and said, "Imagine, if this is the care with which we treat the bread, then imagine the care with which we are asked to treat one another." My friend Vicky comes to mind when I consider this responsibility, to care for one another. She has been bringing us her homemade bread most weeks since we learned of my diagnosis, and it was Vicky who actually taught me that the word accompany has origins in French and Latin that mean to come with bread, or to be a bread friend. I guess accompany is her God word, which is bread by another name. I've noticed the connections between the biblical words took, blessed, and gave. These three verbs appear in the gospel story known as feeding the 5,000, and then again later at the Last Supper. Take and eat. This is my body, which is given for you. In my living, I have hitched myself to this nourishment. I have devoured it, botched it, buttered it, forgotten it, burned it, and relished it. I have tried to take, bless, and give. I have not always lived into that call and have certainly eaten more than my fair share. On a recent phone call, I asked my friend and former coworker Emily if she would make bread for all who attend my funeral. I imagine long tables and thick pieces of bread on big platters and little bowls tucked among the platters holding the best butter, honey, and if it's in season when I die, the citrus jam from Costco that I love. All these years, I have been working out my own ways to come with bread for others and for myself. And I guess in my death, I hope to go out with bread too. And then I want to read a brief selection from Table in the Wilderness. In November of 2020, after Tallu was diagnosed, she and I got to spend a few days together writing in White Bluff at a farmhouse. And She, at that point, had imagined that Table in the Wilderness would actually be the title of this book, so she really loved that image. My luminous grandmother Tallu and her equally luminous younger sister, my Aunt Betty, taught me and my younger cousin, Sarah Wiley, a little ditty when we were children. They said, "Repeat after us. Mabel, Mabel, get off the table. The $2 is for the beer." And repeat we did. In our sing-song young voices, we said it over and over and taught it to our younger siblings and a gaggle of younger cousins. I was probably 30 when I stopped to consider what the words actually meant. But in fact, this chapter of my life finds me spending loads of time each week up on different tables. There was the radiation table, where the kind radiation therapist snapped me into place. As I lay down on the table, the machine delivered radiation to a very small hole that allowed for precision in the area of my tumor. There is the portable massage table of the incredible James, my friend and licensed massage therapist and healer to many, who visits weekly, double masked and toting his speaker and playlist of comforting music for our sessions. And there is the table of my friend Rita, an energy worker and healer, who invites me, as I lie on her heated table, to go on a journey centering the strength of God's Spirit within. In these sessions, I find a place of sacred healing with my breath, with my hopes, and with surrender. In all these different sessions, I often tear up or bawl. It can be so vulnerable to lie prostrate, face up, without protection, in the company of another. Time spent on these tables feels slowed down, without movement, without the convenient distractions I often turn to. Despite the heavy emotions, I have so much gratitude for the privilege of engaging in these modes of healing and treating the cancer and the many physical, emotional, and spiritual side effects of the treatment. I heard the Buddhist teacher Tara Brach say in a Dharma talk online that the joy is in getting real. We long for what is meaningful and what is real. In my searching, I'm trying to distill all the noise into what is most basic, what will nourish me as I continue down this path that I do not want to be on at all. My favorite tables are not set fancy, but are sturdy and simple. Give me a drink in a jelly jar and crusty bread and good butter. If there's a bit more room and forethought, let's add bitter fresh greens with nothing but an uncomplicated vinaigrette and some salty cured meat. Seated around the table, give me real people who are ready to have real conversations and set aside all the pomp and circumstance of what is false, hollow, hateful, worldly, or avaricious. At the table, talk with me about your regrets, your peculiarities, your memories of your ancestors, even if painful, the magic you have encountered, your great love, your fear, your shame, or your hope for the world. Engaging in these practices connects me to my hopes for the future. In my mind's eye, the path ends at a sturdy stone table in the wilderness. And what happens there is real and forever. There is no pain there, no hate, no walls, no shame. The people gather and bring their best because that is all they carry there and all they have. And it is offered freely, wholly, and it is real. Now let's welcome the magnificent songwriter, novelist, activist, advocate, food activist and advocate, I should say, and like Tallu, a total badass, Alice Randall.
Well, you've just heard from one of Tallu's closest friends, and I'm going to mainly read from her book, but I will say that I met Tallu when she was about 2 or 3 years old, when I first came to Nashville, and her father was a songwriter I much admired, and his song 16th Avenue actually was my theme song, and I think of that line, "They walked away from everything to see a dream come true." And I think Tallu has left us to make dreams real. I also want to note that I share with her that I'm in Les Dames d'Escoffier, which is an international organization of women in food, that Tallu fed the world with equity, but she also had a real Epicurean joy and knowledge of unpretentious but profound food. I also wanted to say that one of the last great food experiences I had with her shortly before she was diagnosed, was recreating a 19th century Black woman's recipe, using algae to make a green ice cream that actually captured the history of diversity and foodways in Nashville and trying to make a way forward. And I want to say here, as an African-American person, that I do not know of any person in Nashville food world, except for John Edgerton, that did as much for justice as Tallu, Schuyler, Quinn. And that is one of the reasons I wanted to be here today. And finally, as she takes note of people that other people didn't notice, I mentioned her father was and is a very important songwriter. Tallu also reminds me of how much the children of writers and songwriters contribute to this town, how much the children and the spouses give up so their parents can be out at night working during the day and singing. And she made those contributions and was so extraordinary. And that light where she performed, I think, is an echo of an even brighter space of the things I saw sometimes at the Bluebird. But I think of all the times when she was a little girl that Daddy wasn't home at night because he was out bringing poetry that would help light the way. And in the same way, she was so able to be home and also light the way with her meals. And so I thank her for the contributions as a child and as a woman. And here we go to ordained by something else. Years ago, I took a workshop in which we participants were asked to create our own stoles. A stole is most commonly interpreted as a religious symbol and is typically made of fabric and worn by a minister or priest around the neck, often marking the priesthood as an identity that is set apart. In the workshop, we were encouraged to think about, quote unquote, the priesthood of all believers, meaning every single one of us is called to our own work, our own vocation, and thus anyone can make use of a stole. We learned that the origin of the stole connects back to the actual use and function of a humble cloth draped around a neck to wipe a mouth, mop up a spill, bandage a wound, or dry someone's washed feet. In a traditional ordination service, the candidate for ordination steps forward in front of his or her community and, along with their stole, receives a laying on of hands, the blessed energy flowing from one person to another person. I believe it is a beautiful, powerful ritual for those who participate, but it typically happens inside a church sanctuary with its white walls and sterile air, and there's no grit or grime of the very work we are most deeply called to do. I am not ordained by the church proper, but I think about all the hands who have blessed and ordained me at my job over the years, the brilliant farmers of the Refugee Garden Program, Judy's recipe for her mom's meatballs scribbled on a brown paper sack, David's gloved hands as he pulls in flaps of berries, and Kia stitching up a wounded chicken. The thousands who've handed over delicious, nutritious meals to thousands of people in my community. The hundreds of devoted volunteers who wash lettuce, chop sweet potatoes, and fuel up the food trucks. Every one of us has hands to mend a blanket or ladle soup from a pot. There are those ordained by the community of the church and those ordained by the grit and grime of life. My laying on of hands has just been the day-to-day of ordinary work alongside extraordinary friends, which I believe is sacred in and of itself. And we wipe those hands on the ragged and faded dishcloths from the kitchen cupboard, the stoles that mark our identities. Cooking meals and sharing food isn't something I do. It's the core of who I am. Through this basic and uncomplicated work, I feel I've been pulled into the calling that is my deepest desire, God ordained and community affirmed. It's not a traditional calling, but it is an authentic one. Wiping, drying, wrapping, mopping. We toil with cloth in hand to tend and engage each other, ordained by something else. That's our friend Tallu Quinn's words. I have the great pleasure of now introducing Margaret Wrinkle. Margaret Wrinkle is someone who almost 30 years ago we taught together here a course on food and autobiography that Tallu much admired when she heard about it later. But I am thrilled, and I could almost tear up, because I think that Margaret Wrinkle in these decades has emerged as one of the most important voices in nonfiction in America. And she came up a very unusual path. She came up a path that was part poet, part essayist, but largely mother, daughter, sister, wife, friend. A life deeply lived and then reflected on, and what I have to say here is that, and generously shining lights on other writers, including Tallu, and helped midwife this book. So there is Margaret Wrinkle, please.
This is moving. Okay. The only conversation I ever had with Tallu Schuyler Quinn happened in September on this stage when I was reading from my new book. And there was a young woman sitting really close up front. We were all distanced and masked, and the light was shining right in my eyes. I couldn't see her very well. But she raised her hand to ask a question, and she struggled to find the words. And we waited, and she said, "I'm so sorry. I am living with terminal brain cancer." And she couldn't remember her question, but I didn't know who she was. We were masked, the light was in my eyes. Then she said something about her husband, Robbie, and I figured it out, and I said, "Oh, Tallu." And everyone sitting in your place started clapping, and everyone leapt to their feet and clapped some more. And that tells you something about what Tallu Schuyler Quinn meant to this town. And it's an honor for me to be here and to read her words to you. I picked an essay called Chicken Man to read. I was thinking about when I was in high school and how when we studied Shakespearean tragedy, the teacher would always say about the funny scenes, "This is comic relief," because people couldn't have sat through King Lear for 3 hours without some kind of happiness and joy. They had to have some relief. But I think it was nothing like that. I think that Shakespeare understood what Tallu Schuyler Quinn understood, which is that tragedy and comedy have always been two sides of the same coin. They belong together. There's no part of life that's wholly tragic and no part of life that's wholly funny. But Chicken Man's pretty funny. Right after our wedding, Robbie and I inherited 6 laying hens from a pastor friend of ours who had been called to another church and was moving out of state. This same pastor friend also happened to be the one who taught a class we took on keeping backyard chickens. As my father-in-law was quick to point out, we literally inherited our teacher's pets. A few days before we picked up our chickens, we secured our backyard from predators. We walked the privacy fence, looked for any holes under the house, and leveled a steep hill to detract hungry animals from climbing over. We found the shadiest spot for the position of the coop, bought pine shavings, wheat straw, organic feed, and a waterer. We purchased a coop from an older couple west of town and asked our neighbors for help unloading and assembling it. We set out fresh bedding for the chickens, and then came the babes, all different colors, all different breeds. We gave each one a name. Marin, named for Marin County, California, where we spent much of our honeymoon. Fannie Lou, after Fannie Lou Hamer. Nina Simone, Nepalita, Fannie Lou, Lady Bird, named for our friend and church member, and Toby Ziegler for our favorite West Wing character. We became attached in an instant, learned their personalities, invited our parents over to meet the grandchicks. Practiced picking them up, ate their delicious eggs, and doted on them in public, showing people pictures of them on our phones. Their second night with us, I had to be downtown for work until late. After a while, I noticed I'd missed 4 calls from Robbie. Then came the text, "I lost some chickens." I called back to get more information. My husband was panicked. It was dark, and he could find only 2 of our little brood of 6. He checked the coop numerous times, under the house, under the porch, behind the shed, inside the shed, the coop again. He hadn't heard any sounds of struggle, which would have been an indication that an opossum or a raccoon had gotten inside the fence. Before we hung up, he said his plan was to hit the pavement and take a flashlight into the neighborhood to see if he could find any sign of our chickens, dead or alive. I got home an hour later and walked into a sad, quiet house. Robbie was lying in a dark bedroom with a pillow over his face. He hadn't had any luck finding the chicks in the neighborhood. We discussed all the possible ways and reasons our chickens were gone. A predator had found its way in and made off with 4 of our girls. Their wings weren't clipped as well as we'd thought, and they'd flown over the tall fence. There was some sort of hole or exit beneath our house that was accessible to them but invisible to us. After all this positing, we concluded that we just weren't ready to be chicken parents. And we went to bed sad. The next morning at 6 a.m., Robbie got up to let our 2 remaining chickens out of the coop. and all 6 of them marched right out of their little door. He came back up to our bedroom with a huge grin on his face and a look of confusion. All of them had been inside the coop all along, we discovered, just up on their roosting poles. Every time my sweet husband had lifted the lid of the coop to see if they were inside, they were roosting up on the top portion, the part of the coop in his hands. We were so excited to see them that morning that we had a little party out back in our PJs with breakfast and coffee. We are still laughing at what those chickens must have been thinking each time they were tipped sideways in the dark that night. It would make a great cartoon. We all spend so much time looking for what's right in front of us. In front of us, inside us. We search for God, for ways to be faithful, for something to deliver us from present worry or strife. It's not wasted time, but when we catch a glimpse of God living right where we live, we remember our deliverance has already been sent. And now I'm going to introduce a beautiful songwriter and one of the teachers who taught Tallu Quinn to write like that, Joe Croker.
Yeah, I was telling my students today, 25 years ago, this extraordinarily magnetic, endearing human being walked into my classroom. I was new here in Nashville. I was in my early 30s. And it was Tallu's final year of high school. I'd come from the Midwest, and she just had this intuitive sense. She could see that this was, it was an unmooring for me. And she, along with a handful of really lovely colleagues, became one of the first people who really made me feel at home. And I think that was a big part of Tallu's project. She was pushing back against solitude, against boundaries, and bringing more and more people into the circle. I told the girls today, I said the last day of class of her senior year, Tallu came into the room and she said, "We're getting on the floor." And I said, "We're getting on the floor." And she brought these beautiful little candles, and she set them in an oval, and she literally lit each candle and said something each girl so eloquent and beautiful about every person in the room. So the candles that we all lit in the evenings to connect with her in her final days originated really way before with Tallu herself. And I'd like to make one observation before I read from her work, a couple of passages from the Nicaragua pieces. I don't think that I've ever met such a publicly gifted person who simultaneously was so present and so real and so frank and loving on a personal level. And in my experience, it's extremely rare to find that. You might find someone exceptional in the public sphere or in the private, but she was both simultaneously and amazingly on such a large scale. And I don't know how she did it. Denise and I were talking about this the other night. We look around our house. We have pillows made by Tallu, handmade paper journals. Of course, her journals from high school. I still keep those. They're indelible. When my father was ailing with Alzheimer's, she helped him paint landscape paintings. And I'm sure for so many of you in this room and streaming, you have moments like that in your mind. When our homeowners association shut us down, and Robbie, thank you, you and Tallu took in Raven and Sky and Chevrolet. Oh my gosh, unbelievable. Her energy was boundless, and even more expansive was her heart. Bonnie, you mentioned that lovely quote from Gunilla Morris at the beginning. I want to repeat it. We become who we are together, each needing the other. Alone is a myth. So I was drawn in reading her memoir, advanced copy of this, of those passages that spoke to the occasional loneliness of this incredibly loving and connected person. And I was fascinated by how she surmounted that loneliness. Again, from Nicaragua, this is Tallu. In Nicaragua, the people I worked alongside and learned from were exceptional, brilliant, bright, faithful, and incredibly patient with me. In nearly every interaction I had there, I always felt a little bit alone. This was no one's fault. It was only the normal feeling any stranger in a strange land has in a situation like the one I was in. I always had the sense that I couldn't fully show them who I was, and in turn, I couldn't ever fully know them for who they were. I was simultaneously surrounded by people I deeply respected and wanted to know, and exhausted at the end of every day from all of the effort of trying. In some very raw and human way, even as lonesome as I was, the best part of every day was making it back to my own room and shutting my bedroom door for a long night, finally alone. God was my closest companion during that time. There was no language barrier with God, no getting frustratingly lost in translation. And there was no smartphone or texting or streaming to hide behind. I cried every day. I prayed constantly. I wrote to God while also feeling like God was writing the story too. It's funny how we can, in hindsight, look back on an incredibly difficult time and remember it with fondness. When I lived there, all I wanted to do was go home, and here I am typing away about how close I felt to God and how that time was a true crucible for learning how to love myself and coming to know myself as unconditionally loved. I have experienced intense times of loneliness in my life. The lump in my throat when my parents dropped me off at college comes to mind. The disorienting loneliness I experienced traveling and living abroad, and that painful distance I have felt in some of my closest relationships. And despite the near constant presence of those I love completely, I've felt so lonesome in this illness too. But I have never felt all the way alone. In my earliest memories, I've always had an always present sense of God within me, close to me, hitched to me the way my breath is. This benevolent presence is not something I earned or was owed or applied for or remember receiving at some discrete moment in time. God's loving presence has just been a truth in my life. And it's been in the emptier, slowed down, or even painful times that I can feel this divine love and the strength of her company the most. The other passage that I'd like to read, and again, this is from the Nicaragua sections, suggests, I think, that ever-expanding circle that Tallu created. Here's what she said. I visited with a community in a town called Medeare, and after we finished the meeting, we packed up our truck to head back to Managua, where I was living. A woman from the community asked us if we might be able to carry her and her 6 children in our pickup We said, no problem. And they piled in with a really long stick, some of them in the cab of the truck and some of them in back. We were squeezed in pretty tight. A couple of kilometers down the road, an old man with his thumb up asked us if we could carry him to the market center in Managua. We said, no problem. And he piled into the back, dragging a huge black suitcase behind him. I was so uncomfortable inside that pickup, sitting backwards on no cushion, looking out the back window. I saw the old man unsnap the black suitcase and pull out what looked like magic tricks. He performed one for the woman and her children, and then began to juggle 3 balls in the air while he was straddling the long stick in the moving vehicle. After the woman and her family got out and left for home, a young man with a broken down motorcycle asked if we'd take him to the shop. We said, no problem. And he started rolling his moto toward the back of the pickup. I was thinking in my head, dude, there's no way we're getting this thing in here with the big black suitcase of magic tricks, the magician. We had just picked up a bunch of coolers that we'd bought. We juggled it. And like magic, we lifted his moto into the bed of the truck, and he climbed in too, and we drove toward town. The next day, I got back in the same pickup truck to head back to Mediare again. 20 minutes into the drive, we stopped to pick up 30 blocks of ice, something we'd been asked to bring. I reached into the back seat for my wallet and found instead a live bunny rabbit on the floor. It was a request from one of the community members for her farm. And the bunny amazed me, kind of like a magic trick does when it works. Nicaraguan culture left me lost in translation at every turn. But if there's only one thing I understood about living there, it's that no expectation of how much I can carry or ask another to carry for me is too swollen. We brought the bunny. We made more room. We straddled the stick. We learned how to juggle, and it was magic. I mean, there are some things you just can't leave behind. Tallu Schuyler Quinn never left any of us individually or collectively behind. With this beautiful book, she still connects, and we're blessed that along the way, she brought us into a very, very special circle and shared with us her ineffable magic. And finally this evening, I'd like to introduce Tallu Schuyler Quinn's beloved husband, Robbie.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm left to say many thank yous, so I'll try to be brief. Thank you to Jess and Ann, and to Joe, Margaret, to Alice and Bonnie for your words and for making Tallu's words jump off the page. It's great to hear some of those stories that I've only seen in print or on a screen for so long. I wrote the acknowledgments for the book basically after Tallu couldn't really write anymore. And then as I was reading through some of her notes the other day, I realized she had already written some acknowledgments. And I just hadn't seen them. And so as a way of thanking a few people and just showing our family's gratefulness, this is what she wrote. If one wants to ventilate compassion, to breathe it out, It requires that one first breathe it in, surrounded by a deep and wide community who have showed me kindness upon kindness, who includes many more than the following. And I think this was incomplete. Scott Owings, my favorite pilgrim walking the way. Margie and Dee, connected forever by the love who created us. Janet, always. Johnny and all living creatures at High Hope Farm. Lady and Billy, in it for the long haul. Sarah, Melinda, Judy, Thomas, Karen, Ann, Rita, and all the board members who have buoyed this work and these ideas. Susanna. Bill, Barry, Rob, Gordon, for giving me an opportunity. Clay and everyone at the Woodmont Christian Church. And to the Nashville Food Project staff, board, volunteers. You have written these stories. This is your book too. And that's where it left off. I think she had so many other categories of people to thank. I'd like to thank Margaret Riley King and Becky Nesbitt, a dream team of an agent and an editor who made it feel so personal for us and worked with us through all the changes Tallu was experiencing. To my family, my parents always, and my siblings and spouses, to Tom and Sarah, always. Thank you for being so available and so supportive. And Roy and Luke for all the support and presence. There's so many others, and like she said about ventilating, so many ways I want to breathe all of this in. I feel stalled by all the thanks I want to give, but I'll just say a big thank you to everybody. Before I read something, I thought it might be nice to have you all hear Tallu herself. And before I cue that, I just wanted to say, we had to rush the publication. This book was actually going to come out this August because we were worried she just wouldn't be able to contribute at all to the process as she was declining. And the team at Penguin Random House and the agency were really amazing. And so I'm so grateful that now, 2 months since her death and burial, this is a great way of coming back to celebrate her and remember her. But a part of rushing the process meant that we were trying to see if she could do any interviews at all about what she had written. She really couldn't, but we did manage to get her to record the author's note at the beginning of the book. She had a headset on with someone in New York and an editor in Atlanta who, because Tallu at that time couldn't read because of her eyesight, and her language and speech were also being affected gradually by the tumor, couldn't really remember. The editor fed her phrase by phrase her own words, and she tried to say them back. And then they sort of stitched it together into the first chapter of the audiobook. And it's so great to hear her words. I heard a little bit of them today. And so we'd like you to listen to her reading a few paragraphs from the end of the author's note.
I am understanding that facing my own death requires an active release and deep letting go of nearly all I hold dearest to me. It is so, so hard, but at this threshold, I both marvel and wail in despair about all the love my life contains and how those experiences of love expressed continue to be so meaningful to me. But it's in this way that profoundly, blessedly, unexpectedly, my broken heart is saving me. Decisions are clarified, relationships are repaired, attention is focused, and we are sharing more truthfully. It is not perfect, but it is courageous. Ganila Norris writes, "Honor the heart that can feel the joy and the terror of the world in you and in me. Only what is truly human can walk this path, walk through, and be constant. Bow to that heart. My life has been and continues to be full of extraordinary gifts. The curved pinky fingers that look just like my dad's, the milk from my mother's chest, the profound love I feel for my two brothers, the food that sustains us, the friendship that buoys us, the trees that purify our air so we can breathe it, the animals who are slain for our nourishment, my children whose voices delight, and the body of my beloved. I am dying young of a tenacious, insidious, incurable brain cancer. But God is everywhere, for alone is a myth. This is Tallu Schuyler Quinn, Nashville, Tennessee, November 2021.
Thank you. I sort of made a promise to myself that I would tell Lula and Thomas that I counted how many times your names were mentioned in the book, and you each were mentioned 16 times exactly, just so you know. Well, and you should look up as many times as she says kids and my family, they all count. Like I told you on the night that she died, this book is really a love letter to you and Thomas, and we'll have to tell him that. And I think if she could write another book, she could write a whole book just about how great it is to hold you. But this is pretty good. It's been hard for me during this process because I think I really want to think that this book is enough for me. And I hate to say it at such an event in this way, but I'm struggling with realizing that it's not. It's not all of her words. It's not going to satisfy me or help completely with my grief, or yours maybe. But it's nice to know that it is something I can come back to. And as I go through her notebooks, many, many notebooks, Mr. Croker, there are so many more words that I haven't discovered yet of hers, and so many stories from people like you all that we'll have to keep sharing. One other thing that helps me is to know that much like the National Food Project really wasn't a charity, more a community, this book really is the same too. And it just helps me to know that we are all going to read this and notice something better than we noticed it before, or raise our hands and sit in the front and ask the first question. And I don't know, it feels like sometimes at home we're just in an abandoned kitchen that she left us with so much salve. And so much salve. But I know that we can all work together to give it meaning and reclaim it. So I'm actually not going to read from the book. I was going to read the last chapter, but after thinking about it, I'll be brief too, I'm sorry. I think the last chapter is just really special and personal, and I'll let you read it in a personal way and get your own meaning out of it because it's really special. I remember she was writing blog posts, and then she wrote this and gave it to me to read, and she said, "What do you think?" And I kind of couldn't stand up in October 2020 when she gave it to me. But it's a really special chapter. But another piece of writing I found the other day was a journal entry that she had written about the death of her aunt. And I'd like to share it with you as the final thing today, and I'm just so grateful for y'all being here. Several years ago, our family spent the summer in Ireland. We rented a farmhouse 1 mile from the beach and 1 mile from the mountains. All summer long, I collected smooth rocks in purples, grays, browns, and whites. They were equal parts ocean and mountain, and their surfaces were made even smoother by my intentions to bring them back home with me. On our very last day there, I packed my backpack full of rocks. No books, no portable CD player, no change of clothes for the plane, just my rocks. When my dad lifted the bag, he pressed me to take them back to the ocean. And after some argument, I took my backpack down and pitched them, one by one, back to the earth. Our family gathered around a big hole in the ground this week to bury my Aunt Beverly, who died unexpectedly while on vacation with my uncle and their friends. At the cemetery, we made a circle around her empty body, which was stretched across the empty hole, and stood there as witnesses to the very beautiful life she lived. We let her go there and spit our prayers into the turned-up earth. It's not easy to let go of someone so young, someone with so much life left in her. The day after her funeral, I visited some friends in Kentucky. Our time together was a balmy salve for a broken heart. After sharing dinner and conversations, we took a walk through their neighborhood and found an old sycamore tree with a wide trunk. Scattered around its base were pieces of its own bark, curled and rolled and pocked with age spots and small holes. I imagined the tree bark buckling in the heat, curling away from the new layer below it, and eventually peeling itself off. It wept itself clean of what was dying or already dead. The felled bark laid on the ground around the tree like so much food to feed the roots below. How do we learn to let go of something that's gone already? Having lost only his sister, I'm watching my father let himself cry his heavy tears. Having lost her only daughter, I'm watching my grandmother give her faithful praises to God. Standing beneath the old sycamore, I'm learning how to let what's already going be gone. The open mouth of the earth swallows up our losses, sometimes before we are ready to lose them or toss them back, and we learn hard lessons all along the way. Shedding one thing gives way to a new thing, and in our loss, we have to believe the newness will be beautiful. But that's hard to remember when the smooth stones you didn't get to keep are still the most beautiful you've ever seen. But the one who has already gone from us falls away and nourishes the life in us that's still left to grow. And we grow, and our faith grows. And we spit out our prayers of thanks when we realize how well we are fed by all we've lost. Thank you so much for... Thank you so much for coming and staying tonight. I don't know if I'm going to be the last voice, but I'm so incredibly grateful. I think Thomas and Lula still might have some sugar-fueled energy in them to sign a few more books back there. If you need a stamp for your book or would like to get one later, it's great. And I hope you enjoy and share Tallu's words. Thank you. Hey,